with key concept 1.1. This is called Big Geography and the Peopling of the Earth. Basically how humans started moving around and adapting to this island we call Earth. So archaeological evidence indicates that during the Paleolithic era, that is the era before farming or the old Stone Age, hunting and foraging bands of humans gradually migrated around Earth, beginning in East Africa, then moving to Eurasia, Australia, the Americas, and they adapted their technology and cultures to these new climate regions. So on your review packet, I've asked you to trace the migration of humans from their origins in East Africa, which you can see on the map here, around the world. Just use arrows and lines to show their people's movement around Earth. And you can see here generally with this map where people went and roughly the time that archaeologists think they might have moved there. So from Africa, then throughout Africa to the Middle East, South Asia, Europe, during the last ice age to the Americas, where humans migrated throughout. Now humans, as they migrated to these increasingly diverse regions, had to develop, of course, diverse and sophisticated tools. One of these was fire. And if we look at the uses and effects of fire, we see that it sterilized food, which made cooking food easier, or made cooked food, easier to digest. This led to better brain development in humans. Fire could also serve as protection against predators and allowed humans to adapt to colder environments. In addition to fire helping humans adapt to new environments, we also see new tools for hunting. The development of knives and arrowheads, axes and sharp spears allowed humans to adapt to whatever environment, whether it was fishing or hunting big game or hunting small game, depending on where they lived. As a group, in groups, people lived in mostly small groups. They structured social, economic, and political activity around these kind of small kinship bands. These bands of people would exchange people, ideas, and goods with one another, albeit in a much more limited local sense. This pretty much is everything that you need to know about Key Concept 1.1, although if you want some more in-depth information, go to those websites I suggested. These are some examples of those different climate regions where people move. You have to imagine that people migrated in everything to everything from rainforests to subtropical climates to tundra climates. And depending on where they were, that meant adapting their lifestyles as well. Looking at Key Concept 1.2, this is dealing with the Neolithic or agricultural revolution and early agricultural societies. So beginning about 10,000 years ago, the Neolithic revolution led to the development of more complex economic and social systems. Possibly as a result or a response to climatic change, permanent agricultural villages emerged first in the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean. But agriculture also emerged at different times in different places. So we see agriculture emerging in Mesopotamia and the Nile River Valley, the Yellow River Valley of China, Papua New Guinea, the Indus River Valley of South Asia, found in sub-Saharan Africa, and then of course in the Americas, especially in Mesoamerica and Andean South America. Depending on where people were, they of course domesticated whatever was locally available to them, plants and animals. In Mesopotamia, we see wheat, rye, barley grown, and goats domesticated. In Africa, it was yams and cattle. In Southeast Asia, different varieties of rice. In Mesoamerica, maize or corn, as well as beans and squash. And in South America, the development of potatoes. So depending on where people were, they were domesticating different things, and the development of agriculture occurs in these regions at different time periods as independent invention. Now, pastoralism also had developed by this time period. It developed mainly in Afro-Eurasian grasslands, and it was, some people believe, a transition to farming. People first learned to domesticate these animals and follow these herds, and then as they returned to the same grazing lands each year, they discovered perhaps that crops were growing the same place, the same time of year each year, and that perhaps they learned to farm from that. That is one kind of theory of the development of agriculture. Pastoralism, of course, could negatively affect the environment when lands were overgrazed. Agricultural communities also adapted to their environments. People had to work cooperatively to clear land and even to create water control systems or irrigation systems. As we'll see in time period 2, the Qanat system of Persia and the Shaduf were new ways of providing water for these groups of people. Of course, that drastically affected environmental diversity as well. When people were growing crops maybe in regions where they traditionally would not grow, as humans learned to mold the environment to their needs. Agriculture and pastoralism, as they develop, also transform human society. Pastoralism, for example, was a step toward agriculture. If we're looking at the effects of these on your review packet, you'll see that pastoralism is a step toward agriculture. They served as intermediaries in trade. Of course, we know that there was some overgrazing and environmental erosion, but if we think socially, most of these people were egalitarian. In agricultural societies, we see the development of social stratification. When there are more abundant and reliable food supplies, populations increase, and that allows people to specialize their labor because not everyone's job needs to be procuring food for the group. So if not everyone needs to farm, for example, you might have people more responsible for making certain crafts, or for selling and trading goods, or perhaps for writing, or for defending the food supplies and the people of your civilization. Some have to organize all this and they might become government officials. Some might need to perform certain rituals so that the gods keep providing year after year. They might develop into priests. And of course, someone oversees this. They might be your top dog, your king. So we see this specialization, this social stratification occurring in agricultural societies. Of course, these would normally occur in places where villages and cities develop. We'll see government develop, more complex religion, language, and writing develop in these places as well. Both pastoralists and agriculturalists are going to see populations rise due to more food being available. Now, alongside the development of agriculture and pastoral life, we see technological innovations lead to improvements in agriculture production, trade, and transportation. For example, here are some of these technological innovations. Pottery, which could be used to store food or store grain. Plows, which would prepare fields to bring better agricultural yields. Woven textiles to store goods or just for clothing that allowed people to adapt to environments. Wheels and wheeled vehicles for warfare and for transport of goods. We also see metallurgy develop. First, bronze tools and later iron tools to help people better adapt to their environments and carry out their way of life. Sometimes this might to war, of course. Now, lastly, we see in this key concept new forms of social organization, especially patriarchal forms that developed in both pastoral and agrarian society. Patriarchy is a system of social or government organization in which men hold most of the power and women are largely excluded. This doesn't mean that women are always excluded. We'll see examples where they are quite involved, but overall, patriarchal systems develop, especially as people move away from hunting and gathering, where men and women basically were providing an equal share of work. We'll see the role of women change as, especially when we see the specialization of labor, jobs that men do become more valued over the jobs that women do in these societies, for better or for worse. Take a look at key concept 1.3, the development and interactions of early agricultural, pastoral, and urban society. This key concept basically has to do with the beginning of states or organizational units that were able to mobilize labor or resources over a large area. And there are a few core foundational civilizations that you need to know in AP World History. You certainly need to know where they are located. So the ones that you must know are Mesopotamia along the Tigris and Euphrates River valleys, Egypt along the Nile River Valley, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa along the Indus River Valley, the Shang in the Yellow River or Huang He Valley, and in the Americas, the Olmec of Mesoamerica and the Chavin of Andean South America. These civilizations you must know, and I provided you in your review packet with a map where you should be labeling those civilizations now. Now, within these core civilizations, we see the first states emerge, especially in Mesopotamia and the Nile River Valley. As I said earlier, states are powerful new systems that mobilized surplus labor and resources over a large area. Rulers of early states often claim divine connections to power, and this can be seen in the works here, these artifacts. The one on the left being the stele that contains Hammurabi's code. At the top is carved a picture of Hammurabi receiving this code from the god Shamash, showing that divine connection to power and giving them legitimacy in their rule. Oftentimes, rulers enjoyed military support as well in order to legitimize their claim to power. As As states grew and competed for land and resources, some people were more favorably situated and had access to better resources. A really great example of this is our first empire, the Hittite Empire, who had access to iron and develops iron weapons, which enabled them to conquer the surrounding territories of people, especially in Mesopotamia, because those people were using kind of brittle bronze tools. The Hittites very much wanted to protect this resource and the knowledge of iron tool making. They would even cut out the tongues of anyone who knew about this, so that they could not go and spread that knowledge back. Of course, it's hard to keep anything a secret, so it eventually does spread to surrounding territories, leading to their fall. But the Hittites did expand their territory, allowing them to gain even more resources, more surplus food. We see growing populations and conquering as they conquer surrounding states. We also see that pastoralists were often the developers and disseminators of new weapons and modes of transportation. So some examples of new weapons that are developed by these groups of people and then are traded and this knowledge spreads include composite bows and iron weapons and new modes of transportation such as chariots and horseback riding. These things are developed kind of independently, and then the knowledge spreads, especially with the help of pastoral groups. And that, I think, is really important to understand the place of pastoralists in this early kind of Neolithic era. And they were very important for trade, especially. Now, culture also played a significant role in unifying states. And it did so through laws, language, literature, religion, myths, and monumental art, as the key concepts tell us. Early civilizations developed monumental architecture, like the pyramids at Giza on the left there and the ziggurat of Mesopotamia on the right. Monumental architecture was not just showing wealth and power, but they served specific functions, right? So they may have been used for burial of pharaohs or for religious functions. They also served as gathering places, temples. Think about this: monumental temples where people could gather together. Oftentimes marketplaces and trading places might develop near them. They might be places of safety because people aren't going to make war on a religious site. So markets might develop around. But these examples of monumental architecture were certainly important for unifying states and showing off the power of a state. Urban planning is another way. Whether it was defensive walls, the development of streets and roads in grid patterns, or water and sewage systems. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are two good examples of city planning and the development of water and sewage. In South Asia, it would take a government to organize the development of these very kind of highly advanced ways of organizing groups of people. We also see systems of record keeping. There on the left, cuneiform, which you can usually recognize from its wedge shape. Usually it's in some kind of clay tablet. Hieroglyphs on the bottom right there, and other pictographs were commonly used for writing. I don't have it pictured here, but the alphabets developed. For example, the Phoenician alphabet develops in the Eastern Mediterranean, and some forms of record keeping that we don't even recognize really. The quipu, you see there in the top right, developed in the Andean civilization, used systems of knots to keep record. And these systems of writing would develop and then spread from there. There are a lot of other examples of systems of record keeping, whether it's linear A or linear B of the Minoan and Mycenaean civilization. But there are plenty of examples of this, and certainly it was important for the development of trade and the development of governments. States developed legal codes in this time period that reflected existing hierarchies and facilitated the rule of government over the people. So some examples of legal codes that you should know are the codes of Hammurabi and Ur-Nammu, which you see pictured here. New religious beliefs also developed in this time period to help unify groups of people. On the far left, you see the symbol for Zoroastrianism, and a very good example of one of these early unifying religions in the Persian empires. The development of the capital city of Persepolis is very much linked to Zoroastrianism imagery. The Vedic religions, which would develop eventually into Hinduism, and of course Judaism, Hebrew monotheism, which you see there on the right, would have major influences later on. And it is important to understand that these new religious beliefs that develop in early human history continue to have strong influences in our later time period. Early in human history, of course, trade is going to expand. It's not going to be overnight, but we're going to see trade go from being local to regional and from regional to interregional as civilizations exchange goods, ideas, and technology. And you need to know three examples of interregional trade for this course. One being trade between Egypt and Nubia to the south, a second between Egypt and Mesopotamia, and a third between Mesopotamia and the Indus River Valley. How do we know this occurred? Mainly through our study of artifacts. For example, Indus River Valley seals that have animals on them and writing on them have been found in Mesopotamia as evidence that trade occurred. And lastly, we see culture playing a significant role through social hierarchies. And this includes patriarchy. It intensified as states expanded and cities multiplied. Of course, we see others growing kind of with states. That's pretty much it for your first set of key concepts. Of course, if you did not understand anything in full, I encourage you to go and look deeper at these topics through one of those sites I recommended. Keep in mind that time period 1 is only 5% of the AP World exam. So as you plan out your studying, you don't want to spend more than about 5% of your time looking at this time period. It's only a few questions, but it is important for understanding some of the foundations, especially in time period 2, which is where I will see you next. Have a good day and good luck on the AP World History exam.